which have, gone through erosion since then, but they would have been so much more prominent back during the time of the war. And this would have been the everyday life of a soldier. For many of the men that made it back home after and during 1918, a lot of the men actually shoved their medals into their sock drawer and never talked about the horrors that they suffered during the First World War at all. It's really the future generations after that where stories of what these men had to go through came to light decades after the war was even fought. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to head up towards no man's land. We're going to see one of those massive crater holes caused by one of those deep mining tunnels, and we'll talk a little bit more about how the assault on Vimy Ridge played out. So, any questions? Okay, let's walk through.
It's wobbly.
Yeah, it's a little bit wobbly.
Yep.
Nice.
Got the flag behind that, I assume.
Yes, I did. You can't really tell because it's not flapping in the wind, but yep. I mean, that's not a bad shot. Look.
You know what you're doing.
Well, not when it comes to photography. I think I wanted to come back camera there for 3 hours.
Real poppy. Should we grab a shot?
Should have brought my camera.
Yeah, for that. But hey.
Okay, perfect.
Well, we did before, right?
Well, yeah, but at the same time, I can't just, make the guy. And the guys don't work for me.
But it's a super special opportunity. Like, being able to participate in different events like that, aside from work, like, unforgettable, for us. This is such a wonderful job.
I love how the only thing we can see is like your stick walking through the trenches.
I gotta say, I've never seen a stick like that before.
No?
No.
It's pretty cool. It's a 360 camera, so you get a full experience.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, this is my third time here, and I never feel satisfied with what I brought back in terms of
That's a
catching.
whole different perspective.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So something that you folks might have actually noticed about the trench is that we weren't walking in a straight line. We were actually walking essentially in a big zigzag formation, and this is how every single trench was dug by the Allied forces during the time of the Great War. Actually done for strategic reasons. So German forces also performed trench raids, which we talked a little bit about earlier. So if a German soldier happened to make their way into one of the Allied forces' trenches, the zigzags actually protected all of the other soldiers that found themselves there. Same thing, if a hand grenade were to be thrown into the trench, the walls of the zigzags would protect the rest of the men, other than the one who would have been probably close to that hand grenade. Now, this is one of the various no man's lands used during the time of the First World War. Only 25 meters on the other side, where you can see that cement coming up from the ground. That is one of the German frontline trenches as well, actually continuing along the edge of the trees there. And I definitely invite you folks, actually, I'll bring you into the German trenches after this. So, the assault on Vimy Ridge began again at 5:30 a.m. on the 9th of April, 1917. The 4 Canadian divisions all advanced early in the morning towards their objectives. And by the end of the first day, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Canadian divisions all managed to take their objectives. Hill 145, where our monument stands today, on essentially this massive ridge, 145 meters above sea level, where German forces had taken control over this ridge during the Course à la Mer of 1914. The ridge was taken on the 10th by the evening by the 4th Canadian Division. And the assault was over for the Canadian forces by the 12th. So, a big success for Canadian forces, It was essentially the ridge that nobody else could take, but it was the Canadian forces who came here. So while they were also celebrating the massive success, it's also important to remember that the assault came with a massive sacrifice as well. April 9th of 1917 is still remembered today as the bloodiest day in all of Canadian military history, with over 2,400 men dead on the first day of the assault alone. Another 1,200 or so would have died in the subsequent days of the assault, and in total, roughly 10,000 Canadian soldiers were casualties throughout the entire assault, so dead, injured, or missing. And that's why we have our monument here today on our site. Approximately 16,000 Canadian soldiers who died during the First World War remain unidentified today. With your job?
20, actually.
Perfect.
Every tour guide's nightmare.
I know, I'm sorry, but it's
Sarah
20,000.
20,000, perfect. So, our monument bears the names of 11,285 Canadian soldiers who have no known resting sites. Their names are not to be found in a cemetery anywhere on site. For the remaining 6,000, their names are found on the Meningate Memorial in Ippada, Belgium. And that's why we are here to work as tour guides to continue to commemorate and remember the sacrifices that were made for us over 100 years ago. So, that concludes the formal portion of my tour, but I'm actually going to take you folks over to the German trenches and we'll actually be able to walk around through those, but I don't actually have too much information on them. But if you have any questions at all or you have on anything, please let me know. Okay? Is that good? The Maison recently is that the trees that were planted on site here are actually done in a very strategic manner. They have a very intense root system, what actually keeps all of the corpses and munitions from surfacing, so they all stay underground, which is why it's really important that our trees stay very healthy here.
Yeah, because if you guys start digging up, like I've got a lot of work to do.
We wouldn't want to overwhelm you already insanely.
Well, they would be Germans.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Not well, maybe. Not necessarily.
After
Yeah.
the fight, right? They could have advanced forward and taken casualties.
Yeah. But still, I mean, John theoretically has already talked to me about it because they're in the process of replacing trees because some of their trees are dying.
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, we might need to talk to
Good
you.
luck.
And I'm like, oh god, okay.
We don't know what's going on right now. I know we've had a group of specialists come in, but there's some kind of bug or infection that's been killing a lot of the trees. So you can even see some of the ones here where they're dying and some of the bark is getting stripped. It's really apparent back where our Canadian cemeteries are. No idea what's happening. And that's a big issue for the site here because of that.
Are those part of the trees that were planted by the Germans?
So
after the fact?
After the fact, yeah. So all the trees that you see on site here were planted after the time of the First World War, and the French government actually, they did a really good job of essentially rebuilding all of their cities and towns exactly in the same way that they were before. So it actually helps us a lot in the learning of war maps and everything because every town is exactly the same. And of course, trying to rebuild the landscape as this entire sector in northern France was essentially mud and crater holes and barbed wire. So we can definitely take a walk down here now and visit, and you might notice that the formation of the German trench is actually just slightly different compared to that of the Allied forces.
simulates the boards that they used to use. The concrete you stick on the ground.
Yeah.
To keep the.
Well, and those would have been sandbags, not bricks, right?
No, the like the things. Like
Yeah, but
okay.
these would have been sandbags.
Well, yeah. Army guys could do a lot of stuff, but create concrete sandbags is not one of them, especially at the rate that they had to make them.
There would have been typically a little metal plate to protect your faces from being shot at by, I guess, the Allied forces in this case. Yeah. You suck. We hate you.
We drink maple syrup.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, because the metal plate is gonna be, you know, real effective.
I mean, we're really lucky here. We have well over, I want to say, about 112 hectares of preserved battlefields here, and with this in Beaumont Hamel, I believe we're really one of the only two sites that actually has like original remnants from the time of the First World War. Of course, it's really hard to imagine what this would have actually looked like back during that time. We always say, you know, that our sites are so tranquil and we have the sheep and the birds chirping, but it's hard to actually keep in mind and put it into that perspective that it would have been so different for the men back then. And none of them actually wanted to be here. Right, when the First World War was declared, everybody was super excited and quick to enlist to serve on the front. They were going to serve for Crown, serve for their country, and all of the men thought that they would be home by Christmas time.
It's gonna be over quickly.
Yep, but as we know, that is not the case today. I have a lot of brothers. I have 4. I have 2 older brothers, and then when my parents were trying for a 3rd child, they actually had triplets. So I have my 2 triplet brothers, who are actually both currently in the Navy. But you know, of course.
I'm in the Navy.
Oh. I was gonna say, I know there's that. Yeah. But you know, when I think about it and think that if this were my family back during the time of the war, you know, it would have been my dad, perhaps my uncles, my cousins, and all 4 of my brothers would have likely enlisted to go and serve on the front. And the chances of all of them coming home were excruciatingly slim, and it's hard to understand the kind of sacrifices that those individuals made back then, because I have a hard time imagining, you know, how we would do that today here. But we'll keep walking through. Alrighty, enough the tour.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Holly.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Holly.
Thank you. It's such a
Holly.
pleasure to meet you folks. I'm definitely glad I got to have this tour with you guys. So I thank you for coming and visiting today, and obviously thank you all for everything that you do.
Excellent. All right, well, I'm going to walk back to the visitor center with you because I want a photo.